We're living in interesting times, and that is to say the least. With us here at the Rocky Mountain International Prophecy Conference is an expert on national security and foreign affairs. He spoke this morning at the conference on his forthcoming book, Future War, Super Soldiers, Terminators, Cyberspace, and the National Security Strategy for 21st Century Combat, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis. Bob, obviously, we're seeing things happen overseas while we're here at the conference that are just reverberating around the globe. Of course, the terror attack in Nice, France, a couple of nights ago, and then overnight, last night into this morning, apparently a coup attempt foiled in Turkey. What is your assessment of the situation?
Well, the Turks have an internal conflict in a number of ways. Erdogan, who's the president, of course, has, I think, neo-Ottoman ambitions. That is contested, of course, by the Iranians, who have a desire to spread their Shia religion all the way to the Med. And at the same time, the Saudis are trying to push their Sunni agenda, which is, of course, behind the scenes encouraging ISIS and the likes. The military, meanwhile, in Turkey has been under Ataturk a century ago, a very secular organization. He came in and said, no, we want to be more like the West and less like the Middle East that are so troubled by these religious differences. And so you've had this ongoing conflict. Erdogan and his predecessors have purged the military a number of times, chopping off the top military people. But on the underside, we continue to see a lot of hesitancy, a lot of pushback, a lot of reservations about this grandiose plan by Erdogan. They don't want to see that country become an Islamist state, much like perhaps we see in Iran or even in Saudi Arabia. They want it to stay secular. But yet, when the coup took place, the intention, of course, was to overturn that government. But now the factors have come together. They've killed a lot of people. It looks as if Erdogan is going to come out looking better because he has the backing of the main political parties in Turkey. And of course, meanwhile, you're finding that the Kurds who feel disenfranchised will continue their low-level civil war, especially in the southeast. Now, how that plays out against ISIS, against the Syrian regime, and the whole mess that is evolving in that region, that's to be determined. We do have a base at Incirlik, which we fly F-16s and other aircraft out into Syria. The Turks have been cooperative. The Turks are very good allies of ours, clearly with NATO. We have bilateral relations that are military to military. So we want to preserve that. But we'll have to wait and see who the new military leaders are. Are they going to be more Islamist, or are they going to be middle-of-the-road secularist? That is all to be determined.
There are a lot of factors at play there. Of course, Turkey and Russia have had their differences now, especially.
But they've mended those differences. They're mending. Right? Erdogan apologized for shooting down the Russian aircraft, and of course, Erdogan has worked with Netanyahu and mended that fence. So Erdogan is trying to coalesce some support, and so it was interesting that the coup took place when it did.
I guess the other question then is, if the coup had succeeded, now this is hypothetical because it didn't apparently, how might have the Turkish public responded? And I ask this because I wonder how Islam in general feels about what they perceive as Western intervention in their affairs. Would they have seen a successful coup to overturn the popularly elected government as more intervention by the United States or NATO or both?
Well, they well may. Keep in mind, Erdogan, was a slim majority. And so there's a lot of factions that were not necessarily in his camp. It's hard to tell exactly how it would be perceived. There's no secret in many of the Islamic capitals that Erdogan is far more Islamist than anyone for the last 30 or 40 years. And so it probably would have been seen as a bad signal had the military deposed him and allowed a more secular regime to come in. That, I think, probably would have been disconcerting to the Saudis. But of course, keep in mind, the Ottoman Empire used to include a large chunk of the Arabian Peninsula. And so, the people in Riyadh who have already come under attacks from ISIS and the like, And Erdogan, meanwhile, has probably facilitated some of what the ISIS activities are
Right.
by selling petroleum and so forth that they sneak through the border. A very complex arena. Certainly faith plays a role here, and if you're not of the right faith, you're probably going to have more dead than alive.
It's, well, again, interesting times to be sure. We'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. If you missed Colonel Maginnis' talk earlier today, you can still see it. It's part of the live streaming package from the Rocky Mountain International Prophecy Conference. All 41 presentations will be preserved and archived for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, for 2 months from the date of the conference. So you have plenty of time to go back and watch these, absorb the information, share them with your friends. If you haven't signed up yet, you still have time to do so at prophecywatchers.com. Log on to prophecywatchers.com. In Colorado Springs, I'm Derek Gilbert.